All right, guys, day 16, which means we're 8 weeks in. So today we are looking at lesson 49 and 50. So dividing by a decimal number. So this is one in 2 or 3 videos ago. I talked about when we're dividing using decimals and we're dividing by a decimal. There's one extra step that we do that's not too difficult, but it makes life a lot easier. So if we're using the calculator, we don't necessarily have to do it, but it'll make things a lot smoother, especially if we're doing it by hand. So if we have 0.4 and then 1.24, so we're doing this 0.4, I just always write as 0.4, same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the decimal here because I want to divide by a whole number. I'm going to do the same thing here. If we think about this in fraction form, it's multiplying top and bottom by 10. We're doing multiplying by 10, so we're moving one place to the right. We have to do it to this as well to keep it equivalent. But now, when we see that, it's much easier to see, well, 12.4 divided by 4. Same thing, it's just now, oh, well, 4 goes into 12 3 times. 0, then my decimal, bring down my 4, 4 goes into 4 once. So it's much easier than saying, well, 0.4 goes into 1 how many times? Then you're thinking about numbers less than 1 and decimals, and it just becomes a little bit confusing. Whereas this one, it's a much easier approach. Now, if you're doing it in your calculator, you don't need to do it. You can, but you can just put 1.24 divided by 0.4, and it'll calculate it for you. Okay, but we move it to make it a little bit easier. Okay, as they're showing right here. So if we multiply top and bottom by 10, this is the one we just did. We get 12.4 divided by 4, and then it's a little bit easier, especially if we're doing it without a calculator to do. So if we have example 1 down here, 1.24 divided by 0.04, I'm going to move. I want to divide by. If we have a decimal here or here, that's okay, because that we just bring up top. That's not too difficult to deal with. But when we're dividing by a decimal, so what I want to do is I want to move this 2 places to the right. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 100, or I'm going to move 2 places to the right, 2 places to the right, and then I'm left with 124 divided by 4. And we can set that up. 4 goes into 12 3 times, okay, which is 12, nothing left. 4 goes into 4 1 time. It's essentially similar to what we just did, except for there was a decimal after the 2, and this one is just 124 instead of 12.4. Okay, but what we did is we multiplied by 100, we moved the decimal 2 places to the right for both of them, so then we can make the calculation a little bit easier. Okay, example 2, if I have 1.44 divided by, was it 0.6? Yeah, 0.6. So again, we want to divide by 1-digit numbers. We talked about some other ways. If we have like, what was it, 7.5 divided by half, we did 15 divided by 1, which was much easier. So it's similar concept to that, where we're manipulating these so that way we can work with whole numbers instead of decimal numbers. So I want to move it 1 place to the right. I move it 1 place to the right. So now I have 6. Instead of 1.44, it's 14.4. Now 6 goes into 14 twice, which is 12. So I have 2 left over. There's my decimal because it's right above it. Drop down my 4. 6 goes into 24 4 times. There is my answer. So it just makes it a little bit easier when you're working with whole numbers and you're dividing by single-digit numbers. Practice set we'll go over. And then lesson 50, dividing by a fraction and decimal number line tenths. So again, if we have a number line, usually we just put the integers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then their opposites, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. But really, even between 1 and 2, there's infinite numbers between those. Usually, we'll mark it out in increments like tenths. Or if you're looking at a ruler or a tape measure, they might have 8 or 16 tick marks between each 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, because it's broken up into 16ths of an inch. In this one, we're looking at a number line that has 10 tick marks. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1.9, and 2. And then it starts again. So that's just a way that we can show these decimal numbers on a number line. So if we look at y, well, 7 and 8. So I know it's 7 and something. 7 and 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, or 7.4. Okay, so that's just how we can use tick marks between integers to find numbers that are obviously in between those whole numbers or those integers. And looking at dividing by a fraction, so I think we have, or we're going to, there's a video that we watched from Generation Genius, which has a little jingle that goes with it, and it's pretty good at explaining, but it's not overly difficult. It's just when we're dividing by a fraction, since division is a fraction, well, we have a fraction within a fraction. That doesn't really make sense. So when we're dividing by a fraction, what we're doing is we can convert it to a decimal number and divide by a decimal number and manipulate it just like we've talked about. Or we can keep this number to the left, change, this becomes multiplication, and then flip. So keep, change, flip. Keep, change, flip. So this becomes 3, which it already is, times, and then this becomes 4 over 1. Well, 3 times 4 over 1 is 3 times 4, which gives us 12. Okay, so keep, change, flip, or you can just remember we multiply by the reciprocal. So 1/4 becomes 4 over 1, and I multiply 3 times 4 over 1, which is just 4. Again, a reciprocal is just we're flipping our fraction. So 2/3 becomes 3/2. 3/5 becomes 5/3. 1/2 becomes 2 over 1, or just 2. So even if it's a whole number, it still has a reciprocal. Right, so the row of pennies is 2 1/4 inches long. The diameter of a penny is 3/4 of an inch. How many pennies are needed to make a row 6 inches long? How many 3/4 inch segments are in 6? So we're looking at 6 divided by 3/4. So 6 divided by 3/4. Okay, we're going to keep, change, flip, or we're thinking multiply by the reciprocal. So 3 over 4 becomes 4 over 3. And again, just because this is a whole number and it's kind of written in the middle of our division bar, we could think of it as 6 over 1. If we need to write it like that, we can, just to remind ourselves, okay, 6 can be written as 6 over 1. So 6 is not in the denominator, it's in the numerator. So that's where that kind of just helps us, because then we multiply 6 times 4, which is 24, and then 1 times 3, which is 3. 24 divided by 3 is 8. So it would take 8 pennies to make 6 inches row of pennies. So keep, change, flip. Okay, practice set, we will go over these together. So just be prepared for that. And then we'll go over the homework and be ready to go for the end of that unit.